Welcome to Atheist Talk, produced by Minnesota Atheists. Minnesota Atheists practices positive, friendly neighborhood atheism in order to create a community of atheists, to educate the public about atheism, and to promote separation of state and church. We offer free literature and speakers about atheism to the public, and a free trial newsletter to anyone who's interested. We hope that if you like what you see, you'll consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheists. Remember, if you're interested in us, we're interested in you. This is the second of two programs dealing with science and religion. Are they compatible, or are they eternal enemies? With us today is Dr. William Maansma, and in this second part, we're going to be looking at science and religion and their applications, especially regarding the universe, human life, and the mind. Dr. Maansma has a PhD in theoretical physics, a postdoctorate in the history and philosophy of science, and he also has a Master of Divinity degree, and he's also a Christian. So welcome to our program, William.
Well, thank you, August. It's good to be here.
Yeah, we had a great first part, and I'm looking forward to a good second part, too. You're currently an adjunct professor at the Institute of Technology at the University of Minnesota.
That's right.
At the Minneapolis campus. What class are you teaching this semester?
I'm teaching a course on how the world began, science or God.
Ah.
It's a special freshman seminar, 15 students. It attracts people who are really interested in exploring ideas. So it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, that goes right to the heart of the first topic here, the universe. It's probably the most basic question that all of us have, is where did the universe come from, or did it always exist? Now, science and religion have different answers for this. Let's start with religion and creation stories. If we look at the Bible, for example, the Bible talks about the earth being flat and the earth is the center of the universe. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we look at science, of course, the earth is rounder, and the sun is the center of the solar system, and our solar system is not even the center of the universe. Mm-hmm. So we have vastly different physical descriptions of the earth and the universe between the Bible and science. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd agree with that. And in fact, I think there are several different cosmologies in the Bible, all of which are different from our scientific cosmology. I think in reading stories, creation stories from different cultures around the world, it becomes clear that the real point of these stories is not contained in the details of the story, what happened when, or what the monkey said to the Monkey King, or details like that, or what kind of turtle it was on an island. Those are not the important thing. The bottom line of these stories is, where do we as humans fit in the scheme of things? What is the scheme of things, and where do we belong? What are our opportunities? What are our obligations? It seems these stories always end that way.
Okay. You mean our relationship to the God or gods and our relationship to each other?
And yes, okay. The gods, including the gods of the earth and the sky. So it's our relationship with nature around us, as well as with other people, animals.
So it's a mistake to take these creation stories literally, scientifically, as far as...
That's right. And so when the Bible was written, when Genesis was written, people were used to reading stories from various peoples around, and we're quite aware that the real point is, what's our place in the scheme of the universe? Where do we fit in?
Okay.
That's the real point.
Well, looking at the Bible and Genesis, what do they say about our place?
Well, that's rather interesting because the surrounding stories, the dominant story through the Middle East, we know best in its Babylonian version, and there the gods created us because they were tired of preparing every day for their parties that evening, cleaning up and getting food and drink. So they created people to get their food and drink for them, for their parties that night. So what's our place? Well, we'd better provide those daily sacrifices so they have food and the gods have food and drink for their party that night, or they may be angry with us and do bad things to us.
Oh, like a lightning or a flood or a disease.
Yeah.
If we don't appease the gods.
Make a tree fall on us.
Okay. How is God depicted in Genesis?
That's the interesting thing, is that the Creator, there is a Creator God, kind of over the whole process. Some cultures have that, but this God in this story is said to be good. I mean, when this God sets about, in chapter 1 of Genesis, making things, and he stands back after he's made light and says, yeah, that's good. And at the end of his whole work week, he looks over everything he's made and says, wow, that's very good.
So the God of Genesis is all-powerful and all good, and everything he creates he's saying it's good.
And the point is, from there, I mean, our place, where do we fit in it?
Okay.
God has handed it off to us and said, okay, now it's your turn. You finish the job. And our work week should look like God's. As at the end of the week, we should be able to say, we should be able to look at what we've done and say, that's good. The world is a better place because of what I did this week.
Okay. Well, that's a noble goal. But of course now, that's not the message you hear from many Christians from Genesis. They say, God handed us this perfect place, but then we screwed it up. And that's why there's all these rotten things. It's our fault, and it's not God's fault.
Yeah, I do think that's a misunderstanding of the story. At least in the Middle Eastern cultural background, it becomes clear that the world starts off as a rather wild place. I mean, and there's, in chapter 1, there's just darkness and waters. Oh, but there's God's wind blowing over the surface of the water too. And God brings the darkness under control and the water under control. Gives them their place, and now they're good things. Night and the sea.
From chaos to order.
From chaos to order, yeah. But then we're put in charge of the earth to now bring some order to the rest of the earth, to the animals in particular. You know, where do they belong? In chapter 2, we find Adam distinguishing between, which means the human Adam, distinguishing between the domestic animals and the wild animals, so which are going to find their fulfillment in the garden with the human, like sheep, which are going to find their fulfillment out there, like antelope.
Well, I can see that, you know, people looked around and they saw examples of what seemed like chaos, like storms or a disease that's out of control, wild animals. But a lot of life was ordered. Humans had evolved enough to agriculture and shepherding and things like that. And so I could see how they might assume, well, once maybe everything was chaos and now it's tending toward more and more orderliness, and we have a role to play in bringing about that order with our intelligence. And you could attribute this to a God, as Genesis does, but I don't think you necessarily have to. And I don't see an advantage in doing that.
Well, by itself, I think that's true. Just looking at the question of should we be doing good during our work week? You know, we can just posit, yeah, we should be. It's a noble goal. Let's do it. But it's God as a unifying explanation for a wide diversity of things. And it has to be evaluated one worldview over another. That is, which provides the most coherent, natural, simple explanation of the way things are. You know, I may think that a worldview that includes God as a key feature may be simpler, more obvious, and you may think the opposite.
Yeah, and I'd like to get into that.
That's the question we have to ask.
Exactly. So let's take the universe as a whole first. Now, we don't know if it had a beginning. Maybe it always existed. There's some scientific theories out there now that allow for a pre-existence to the Big Bang, and we don't know how far back it would go. Maybe the universe has always existed. But if you start saying there was a God that brought it into existence, well, of course, then the first question is, well, who created God? If complex things need creators, well, God is at least as complex as the universe, not simple. See, everyone thinks of God as simple, but I don't think of God as simple. I think of God as very complex. Because he has to be at least as, how can he create something that's more complex than he is? That doesn't really make sense. He's got to be at least as complex as the universe. And we usually attribute to him consciousness, which we don't attribute to the universe as a whole. Some New Age people might, but most of us don't. So you have the problem of God being very complex. We have the problem of consciousness. And we have the problem of being able to create something from nothing. So I think God is very complex, and I don't see an explanation coming from religion as to how this is possible.
Well, surely a mind that we're familiar with every day, your mind, my mind, is rooted in a brain of great complexity. In order to do that, in order to have such a mind, there has to be great complexity. The concept of thought itself is not necessarily a complex thing. The question to be looked at, is it possible? I mean, our minds are rooted in our brains, and what happens in our brains, apparently. Is it possible to have a mind, or something like a mind, a consciousness, that's not rooted in a brain? Maybe, maybe not. That would be something to consider.
Yeah, that's the question the atheists have is, how can you have thought without a brain, which is what God is described as, being able to think without a physical aspect to him.
Well, people through history have thought that a reasonable proposition.
But of course the trend in science is in the opposite direction, against dualism.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm not advocating dualism for the person.
Okay.
That is, I do agree that our thought is rooted in our brain. You know, it's an emergent property of our brain. I would suggest.
Well, I like that suggestion. Another problem we have with the God idea, I may be the originator of this one, I haven't heard anyone else express it anyway, is the problem with the size of God. Now, if we accept the universe as being 25 billion light years across, and if God fills the universe, as the stories say that he does, maybe he's bigger, but at minimum he fills the universe. So God is 25 billion light years across. Okay, now, when a human, when we stub our toes, a message goes from our toe to our head. And the speed that it takes for that message to travel depends on the health of our body and the distance it has to travel. And maybe it's half a second, I don't know, but it's a certain amount of time anyway. Now imagine, back to God. God is 25 billion light years across, and let's say he's in perfect health. Then let's say that messages within God travel at the speed of light, the fastest known speed there is.
Fastest possible speed. according to Einstein.
According to Einstein. I don't know. I can't prove that there's anything faster, but we'll say.
There's good reason to think
Okay.
that.
So going at the
scientific terms.
speed of light,
Yeah.
it takes 25 billion years for one edge of God to be aware of the other edge of God. 25 billion years. And even if messages within God travel at 1 billion times the speed of light,
Yeah.
it's still 25 years for one edge of God to be aware of the other edge of God. And yet God is supposed
Yes.
to be a unified being. So that's a problem we have about the very nature of God. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, that's very interesting. Yes, yes. I think if you go back in history, you know, the earliest conceptions of the gods, nature gods, I mean, they were limited in location. So you had to go to places where they frequented.
Mount Olympus, or
Mount Olympus, yeah.
or
But
the
that
river
was
god,
sort
or
of off limits, but
you know, like the river god or the
Yeah.
forest god, and so they were limited. And
yeah, you
area.
go to a forest to get in touch, and in particular maybe a special glade in the forest. Or if you go to Athens, you know, when someone was going to send out a ship, a business person in business was going to send out a ship on the seas. They go out to the tip of the peninsula and the headland rises, and there's a temple to Poseidon, the Neptune, the god of the sea. You know, and you're really in touch with the sea there. So that's the place you go. You're likely to get Neptune's, Poseidon's attention.
so are you saying that due to the size problem I just brought up, that polytheism makes more sense, that you have lots of gods and then they can be unified because their space is more confined?
Yes, it's certainly easier. It's an easier concept because it's more similar to us. In envisioning, even without the speed of light problem, even in the small universe envisioned in biblical times, there's still, if God can pay attention to any one of us, to all of us at the same time, then you have something beyond our own mind. What that would mean is that there is within God's consciousness a track that follows you and a track that follows me.
And that's where I get to this idea of God being very complex. If you can, as you say, follow all of us, read our minds even, supposedly. If we pray silently, he's supposedly reading these thoughts.
Yeah.
But that's a very complex being. To me, it's unbelievable in both senses.
That's a significant challenge.
Yes. Now, you said that the concept of a God is kind of a unifying thing for your view of the universe. Maybe it brings meaning to the universe, would you say?
Well, yes. God as creator then provides an explanation both for the physical universe and for the fact that we feel some kind of a transcendent presence, whether it's of a mind or not. That maybe what it is that we're sensing God's presence in the world. But then God also then created us with a purpose, and that makes it meaningful. Created us as to work in partnership together, in stewardship of the earth. That then is the meaning. That's our place in the scheme of things. That's our meaning. Is when we're fulfilling that we'll find fulfillment, and that then would be explained also by God making us.
It would seem to me that evolution would explain that, and we attributed these things to a God, but evolution alone would, we evolved as social beings, and that's why we have to cooperate with each other, and we have to live off the land. So that's why we're stewards of the earth. I wanted to finish here with the atheist view of the universe.
Yes.
And I read these to you before, and I think our audience will find these interesting. Quotes from two atheists. First, Richard Dawkins. "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And that's what I observe. This is exactly the kind of world I would expect if there was no God. But just so that we don't end on a note of despair there, Albert Camus said, "Without guidance, without a divine presence in the universe, we are left free to live in accordance with our own values and create a life that has personal meaning." So that's, I guess, the atheist view of the meaning of life in the universe. Do you think that would work too, just as well as your worldview?
Well, the question is, do we really have meaning? I mean, perhaps to create our own meaning is simply to make a choice. I mean, Camus says, say in The Plague, he says, well, he chooses to stay and fight the plague, but he can't blame those who do otherwise. I would say Klebold and Harris in the massacre in Colorado at Columbine High School, they created their own meaning. And the question is, can we say anything about that? Camus would say no. He couldn't condemn them for what they did. They found their meaning. I found my meaning. Can we distinguish?
Yeah. Well, they're definitely creating their own meanings, and some meanings we approve of and we don't approve of. Columbine. I think as human beings, based on our evolution, that we can make judgments, that we can say that things that wanton murder is not a good thing for our species.
But that's something you can't simply derive from the physical universe.
It's an arbitrary choice.
I mean,
you can derive it from our evolution, the survival of the species, and that we all are seeking to exist.
You can explain, but you're not explaining that that's a good thing. I mean,
well, that's what nature, quote, wants us to do. It's our human nature. So
that doesn't make it good, though.
So it's good in the sense that it accords with our nature. But I see what you're saying. It's not like an arbitrary, it's not a fiat kind of a good. But I would also say that...
well, a real good. I mean, is it really good? See, Klebold and Harris were living in a world where they were told that there really is no good and evil, that it's something they make themselves, and so they made it.
I think we all arbitrarily choose our values, because even within religion, you'll get some people saying, my belief in God inspires me to do good, and this is what I call good. And others will say, well, my God inspires me to do good and to fly a plane into the Twin Towers or to launch an inquisition. So God belief can't be relied on to give us a sense of good or evil either.
I think that's quite true. I guess the significant thing for me at this point is that good and evil must be categories that mean something. They must. I think Klebold and Harris, what they did was wrong.
I do too, but I think
really wrong.
Yeah.
And not that I just don't like it. I think you have to say that it was really wrong, or you're open to other teenagers saying, well, that's just your opinion. I'm not going to live the way you say.
Well, I do think in the final analysis, whether you're religious or an atheist, it's an arbitrary choice. I do think that, because we get no clear message from religion.
But we all have a sense of right and wrong.
But it's based on how we were raised. It's based, what's right for us, in some sense, is influenced by society. Look at our attitude toward premarital sex, how that's changed in society. People used to think, it was terrible to have sex before marriage. Now most of it's no big deal.
So it's an arbitrary choice whether to approve homosexuality or not. That's arbitrary.
Our views of that have changed, and I think we have to go back to the principle of human nature and freedom. And maybe I'm choosing freedom as an arbitrary value, but when you choose freedom, And the two values, freedom and not hurting other people, so that I'm free to punch you up to the point where my nose
I think those
comes
are,
to your, my fist comes
Yeah,
up to your nose,
yeah.
but I can't hit your nose, you know what I mean? That's where my freedom ends and your freedom not to be punched.
to spell out
begins.
just what that means takes some work, but
Yeah,
yeah, I think those are good principles.
yeah.
I think they're really good.
And I think when we look at same-sex marriage, it allows for the maximum amount of freedom for them to have the same rights as straight people, and it doesn't hurt anybody else.
You're making a strong ethical argument based on the assumption that our principles are right and wrong.
Well, I'm using freedom and not hurting other people and compassion, and maybe I'm arbitrarily choosing these things, but they seem to lead to the greatest good for the greatest number, and maybe that's an arbitrary choice too.
Well, what I see is that our experience is a richly diverse experience with all sorts of meanings and feelings and loves and hates and perceptions, and with many dimensions. And reality appears to have many dimensions. And what you're saying is, oh no, there's only one dimension, the physical dimension. To which I would say, Shakespeare said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio.
But can we prove them?
Can we prove anything? Can we prove science? I mean, that's one thing I learned in science. No, you just look for the best, best explanation.
When an atheist looks at the world and we look at physical objects and then we look at ethics and we look at the meaning of life and we look at mystical experiences, to us all of these can be explained by the physical world. We don't have to introduce the hypothesis of the supernatural to explain these things.
It seems to me like incredible hubris on the part of the physical sciences to claim all the truth when on the face of it, the reality is so multidimensional.
Well, there are things we don't know, but does that justify us making a leap of faith to the God of the gaps and saying, just because we don't know it, oh, then God did it? And I think God has to prove his case. And we have to have the evidence for the God before we can say that God did it.
Well, we can't expect, if we're only allowing the area of truth in one dimension, the physical dimension, we can't always expect that we're going to be able to prove something in another dimension of life. We have to look for something that explains. It may be possible to explain away our ethical, mystical experience, but it's like the Flat Earth Society explaining away the obvious roundness of the Earth from space.
Well, on that note, we'll have to end. We're out of time, unfortunately. Thank you for joining us for Atheist Talk.